The conference hall stretched across 3 levels of the Veil's Edge Station, a massive structure floating in neutral space between 12 different star systems. Hundreds of delegates from dozens of alien species filled the chamber, their voices creating a symphony of strange sounds and languages. Translation devices hung in the air like small silver insects, converting every word into something others could understand. Jake Morrison stood near the back of the human delegation, his hands clasped behind his back, his face showing nothing. He wore the dark blue uniform of Earth's diplomatic security force, with 3 small medals on his chest. Nothing fancy, nothing that drew attention. That was exactly how he wanted it. Beside him, Colonel Lisa Grant reviewed something on her datapad. She glanced at him once, then returned to her work. They had been through too much together to need many words. She knew he hated these gatherings, all this talking and posturing. But someone had to represent humanity, and someone had to keep those representatives safe. The Galactic Council's Peace Summit had been planned for 2 years. Too many small conflicts had been erupting across the outer sectors. Trade routes were being threatened. Colonies were demanding protection. Everyone was getting nervous, remembering old wars that had cost billions of lives. That was why they were all here, to talk instead of fight, to find common ground before the shooting started again. A movement near the main entrance caught Jake's attention. The Catherine delegation had arrived. He recognized them immediately by their crystalline skin that reflected light in rainbow patterns. They were tall, elegant, and ancient. Their empire had existed for 50,000 years, while humanity was still learning to make fire. At the center of their group walked Princess Valara. She wore robes that seemed to be made of liquid silver, flowing around her like water. Her crown was simple, but made of a metal that did not exist anywhere in human space. She moved with the confidence of someone who had never been told no, never been challenged, never been anything but royalty. The Catherine delegation took their seats in the upper section, a position of honor. Valara's eyes swept across the assembly, taking in each species with the same expression someone might use when examining insects. When her gaze reached the human section, she paused. Jake saw her lean toward one of her advisors. The advisor whispered something back. Valara's expression shifted into something that might have been amusement or contempt. With the Catherine, it was hard to tell. Their faces did not move the same way human faces did. The opening ceremonies began. Each major delegation was introduced. When the human ambassador stood to be recognized, Jake noticed several of the alien delegates barely acknowledging them. Barely 300 years in space. Children playing with starships, some of them probably thought. The morning sessions passed slowly. Jake remained standing, watching, listening, saying nothing. This was his job. Observe, assess, identify threats, keep his people safe. He was good at it, because he had learned in harder places than this fancy conference hall. During the break, delegates mingled in the reception area. Food and drinks from a dozen worlds were offered on floating platforms. Jake stayed with the human group, accepting nothing, watching everything. That was when Princess Valara approached. She did not walk directly to the humans. Instead, she moved through the crowd, greeting various ambassadors, making herself visible. But Jake could track her path. She was circling toward them with purpose. When she finally reached the human delegation, she smiled. It did not reach her eyes. "Ambassador Richards," she said, her voice like wind chimes. "How quaint that Earth has sent representatives to such an important gathering." The human ambassador, a career diplomat named Gregory Richards, smiled politely. "Princess Valara, the Catherine Empire's reputation precedes you. We are honored to participate in these vital discussions." "Participate," Valara repeated, as if tasting the word. "Yes, I suppose even the youngest species deserve a voice, however small." Her eyes moved to Jake, studying him with open curiosity. And you bring soldiers to a peace conference. How very human. Security personnel, Lisa Grant said firmly. Standard protocol. Of course. Valara stepped closer to Jake, looking him up and down. Tell me, soldier, what are those medals for? Subduing your own kind in some tribal conflict? Conquering one of your own cities? He had learned long ago that silence was often the best response. He does not speak? Valara glanced at her entourage, who made sounds that might have been laughter. Perhaps he cannot. Perhaps humans only seem intelligent when they have their translation devices. Several nearby delegates had stopped their conversations to watch. The room grew quieter. This was entertainment for them. The ancient princess putting the primitive humans in their place. Captain Morrison has no need to justify himself to anyone, Lisa said, her voice cold now. Captain, Valara said mockingly, such a grand title for such a young species. Tell me, Captain, how many battles have you seen? How many enemies have you faced? The Catherine Empire has waged wars lasting longer than your entire civilization has existed. Our generals command fleets that could darken your sun. Our warriors train, for centuries, in arts of combat your people cannot even imagine. She reached out and tapped one of his medals with a crystalline finger. These trinkets you wear are meaningless in the scope of true galactic conflict. You are decorated apes, playing at being civilized, pretending you belong among those who have mastered the stars, since before your world had life upon it. The room was completely silent now. Even the translation devices seemed to hover motionless, as if shocked. Jake still said nothing. His expression had not changed, but something in his eyes shifted, just for a moment. Something cold and distant, like looking into deep space, where no light reached. Lisa saw it. She placed a hand on his shoulder, a gentle warning. Ambassador Richards cleared his throat. Princess, I'm sure we can maintain a respectful dialogue. Respect must be earned, Ambassador. Your species has done nothing to earn mine. You have fought no great wars, defeated no terrible enemies. You have simply existed in your small corner of space, and now you presume to sit at the table with your betters. She turned away, dismissing them with a gesture. Perhaps in another 1,000 years, you will have something worth discussing. Until then, try not to embarrass yourselves further. The Catherine delegation moved away, leaving the humans standing alone. Slowly, the other delegates resumed their conversations, though many glanced toward Jake and his companions, with a mixture of pity and second-hand embarrassment. Ambassador Richards looked shaken. I apologize, Captain, Colonel, that was uncalled for. It's fine, sir, Jake said quietly. His voice was calm, controlled, and completely neutral. But Lisa knew better. She had served with him long enough to recognize what that tone meant. It was the voice he used when he had made a decision, when he had assessed a situation and determined the appropriate response. It was the voice he used before he went to work. She just hoped Valara would not give him a reason to remember why he had been truly dangerous once. The summit continued, but something had changed. Word of the insult spread quickly through the delegation networks. Some found it amusing. Others found it shameful. A few of the older ambassadors, those who had been around long enough to remember certain classified events, looked at Jake Morrison with new interest. One of them, a Varun named Ambassador Kelrick, watched from across the room with narrowed eyes. He had heard stories once, whispers of a human soldier who had done impossible things during the Surge Wars. Stories about a ghost who broke empires. Looking at Jake Morrison's quiet, unremarkable face, Kelrick wondered if those stories might have been true, after all. The first day of the summit ended without further incident. The delegates returned to their assigned quarters in different sections of the station. Jake walked through the corridors with Lisa, neither of them speaking until they reached the human residential zone. "You handled that well," Lisa said once they were alone. Jake shrugged. "She's a princess who has never been told she's wrong about anything. What else would you expect?" Still, most people would have said something back. Words don't change minds like hers. He stopped at his door. "Get some rest, Colonel. Tomorrow will be longer." "Jake," she waited until he looked at her. "If you need to talk about anything, I'm fine." He smiled, but it did not quite reach his eyes. "Really, I've been called worse by better people." After she left, Jake entered his quarters and locked the door. The room was small but functional. A bed, a desk, a window showing the stars outside. He sat on the edge of the bed and stared at his hands. They were steady now. They had not always been. His mind drifted back without permission, the way it sometimes did when he was tired. 15 years melted away like fog in sunlight. He had been 23 years old when the Surge Wars began. A young lieutenant, with more enthusiasm than sense, leading a reconnaissance unit on the edge of human space. They had been mapping trade routes when the first reports came in. 6 empires, acting in coordination, had launched simultaneous attacks on over 200 worlds. The Vorkan, the Thandros, the Skellics, the Muran, the Zethrak, and the Koldari, all of them hungry for territory, for resources, for slaves. They called themselves the Surge, and they swept across the galaxy like a plague. The Allied forces tried to stop them. Fleets gathered, battles were fought, and the Allies lost again and again. They had weapons the Allies had never seen, tactics that overwhelmed every defense. Within 6 months, they controlled 40% of known space. Jake's unit had been recalled to Earth for reassignment, but the orders never came. Earth's command was in chaos, trying to coordinate a defense against enemies on 3 fronts. So Jake and his team did what soldiers do when no one is giving orders. They improvised. They started small, raiding Surge supply lines, destroying ammunition depots, stealing intelligence. But Jake saw a bigger picture. The Surge empires were cooperating, but they did not trust each other. They were allies of convenience, not conviction. So he started breaking them apart. The Vorkan citadel was supposed to be impenetrable. It floated in the center of a black hole's orbit, protected by gravity wells that crushed any approaching ship. The Vorkan command structure directed all their military operations from inside that fortress. Jake went in alone. He still remembered the insertion. Dropping from a stealth pod in a suit that barely qualified as armor, timing his fall through the gravity wells with millisecond precision. If he had been off by even a fraction, he would have been pulled apart atom by atom. He made it, barely. Inside the Citadel, he spent 3 days moving through maintenance tunnels and service corridors, avoiding patrols, planting charges, learning the layout. The Vorkan never knew he was there until the 4th night, when he walked into their command center and started shooting. 12 of their top generals died in that room. The rest died trying to stop him as he fought his way back out. By the time he was extracted, the entire Vorkan military apparatus was in disarray. Commanders dead, chain of command shattered. A massive structure that connected 6 star systems, allowing the Surge to move fleets across vast distances in hours instead of weeks. Jake's team infiltrated a cargo vessel, rode it through the gate, and then set off electromagnetic bombs that cascaded through the gate's power systems. The gate collapsed. 3 entire Surge armadas were stranded in dead space, cut off from support, surrounded by Allied forces who had been waiting for exactly that moment. One by one, Jake dismantled the Surge's ability to wage war. He turned their weapons against them. He spread disinformation that made them suspect each other of betrayal. He assassinated key leaders and made it look like rival Surge empires were responsible. The Skellics withdrew from the coalition first, convinced the Vorkan were planning to betray them. The Muran and Zethrak turned on each other over a fabricated dispute that Jake had engineered using stolen communications. The Koldari sued for peace after Jake destroyed their primary weapons manufacturing facilities in a single night of surgical strikes. Within 2 years, the Surge Wars were over. The 6 empires were broken, their alliance shattered, their will to fight gone. Billions of lives were saved, hundreds of worlds were freed, and almost nobody knew it was because of one human soldier and his team. That was how Jake wanted it. When the Allied command offered him medals, promotions, fame, he refused all of it. He requested that the operations be classified at the highest level. He wanted his name erased from the reports. The Ghost of Andros, they had called him. Andros was the first world he had liberated, and the name stuck among the few who knew. But Jake made sure that few stayed very small. He had his reasons. A knock on his door pulled him back to the present. He stood and opened it to find Ambassador Kelrick standing in the corridor. The old Varoon looked at him with eyes that seemed far too knowing. "Captain Morrison, I apologize for the late visit. May I speak with you briefly?" Jake stepped aside. "Of course, Ambassador." Kelrick entered slowly, his age showing in the careful way he moved. The Varoon species lived for centuries, and Kelrick looked like he had seen most of his. He waited until Jake closed the door before speaking. "I wanted to apologize for Princess Valara's behavior today. It was inappropriate and disrespectful." "You don't need to apologize for her, sir." "Perhaps not, but someone should." Kelrick studied Jake's face. "You are young for a captain. The human military must think highly of you." "I do my job." "I'm sure you do." Kelrick moved to the window, looking out at the stars. "I have been attending these conferences for 60 years, Captain. I have met thousands of soldiers from hundreds of species, and I have learned to recognize certain types." Jake said nothing. "There are soldiers who have seen combat. You can see it in how they stand, how they watch a room. Then there are soldiers who have seen war, real war, the kind that changes a person." Kelrick turned to face him. "And then, very rarely, there are soldiers who have ended wars." The silence stretched between them. "I knew a Varan general once," Kelrick continued quietly. "During the Surge Wars, he was part of the Allied command. He told me stories about those dark days, how the Allies were losing, how entire civilizations were being enslaved. And then, suddenly, things began to change. The Surge started making mistakes. Their coordination fell apart. Their leaders died in accidents and assassinations." "War is chaotic," Jake said carefully. "Yes, it is." Kelrick smiled slightly. "My friend, the general, he had a theory. He believed there was a human unit operating behind surge lines. A small team, maybe just one person, who was systematically destroying the surge from within. He called this person the Ghost of Andros." Jake's expression did not change, but something flickered in his eyes. The general tried to find out who this ghost was, but all records were classified. Names were redacted. When he asked Earth's command, they claimed no knowledge of any such operations. It became a mystery, a legend. Legends are rarely true, Ambassador. Perhaps. Kelrick moved toward the door, then paused. "But I notice you did not ask me why I am telling you this story. I assume you'll tell me if it's important." Kelrick laughed softly. "Princess Valara insulted you today. She called you unremarkable. But I have learned that the most remarkable people often appear the most ordinary. They do not need to announce their achievements, because their achievements speak for themselves, to those who know how to listen." He opened the door, then looked back one last time. "Sleep well, Captain. I suspect the coming days will require all of your skills, whatever they may be." After Kelrick left, Jake sat back down on the bed. The old ambassador knew something, or at least suspected it. That could become a problem, or it could become useful. He would have to wait and see. He lay back and closed his eyes, but sleep did not come easily. It never did when the memories started circling. He saw faces of people he had killed, heard screams from worlds he had saved, felt the weight of decisions no one person should have to make. Princess Valara thought humans were primitive. She thought their soldiers were playing at war. She had no idea what war actually cost, what it took from the people who fought it, what it left behind in the survivors. Maybe she would never learn. Maybe she would go through her whole long life believing she was superior, never having to face real danger, real choice, real loss. Jake almost hoped she would, because the alternative was that something would happen to force her to understand, and he would not wish that understanding on anyone. But the galaxy was a dangerous place, and peace conferences had a way of attracting those who wanted to disrupt peace. He would be ready. He was always ready. That was what the ghost of Andros did best. The second day of the summit began with optimism. Several delegations had reached preliminary agreements on trade disputes. The morning sessions focused on mining rights in contested sectors, and surprisingly, progress was being made. Jake stood in his usual position at the back of the human delegation, watching the room. Something felt wrong, but he could not identify what. Maybe it was nothing. Maybe he was just being paranoid. 15 years of peace had not quite removed the instincts that war had burned into him. Lisa noticed his tension. "Problem?" she whispered. "Not sure. Security seems lighter than yesterday," he replied. "Budget cuts, probably. Most of these species don't actually expect trouble at a peace conference," Lisa said. "That's when trouble usually comes," Jake countered. She could not argue with that. The afternoon session was about to begin when the first explosion hit. The blast came from somewhere in the lower levels, shaking the entire station. Alarms began screaming. The lights flickered and shifted to emergency red. Delegates jumped to their feet, some panicking, others frozen in confusion. More explosions followed, a coordinated pattern that Jake recognized immediately. Breaching charges. Someone was forcing their way into the station at multiple points. "Lockdown protocol," one of the station security officers shouted. "All delegates to secure locations." But the security officers were already falling. Weapons fire erupted from the entrance corridors. Figures in black armor poured into the chamber, moving with military precision. They were not here to negotiate. Jake counted them automatically. 20 in the main chamber, probably more in the corridors, all carrying weapons that would cut through the delegates like paper. "Down," he shouted to Ambassador Richards, pulling the older man behind a row of seats. Lisa had her sidearm out, but one pistol against 20 rifles was suicide. "Orders?" she asked Jake. "Keep Richards alive. Get him to the emergency pods if you can." "What about you?" "I'll buy you time." The attackers were herding delegates to the center of the chamber, forcing them into groups. Anyone who resisted was shot. Not killed, Jake noticed. Stunned. They wanted hostages, not corpses. That gave him information about their goals. He watched them work, analyzing their tactics. Professional, well-trained, not random criminals. This was a military operation disguised as terrorism. One of the armored figures, larger than the others, stepped forward. His helmet retracted, showing the scarred face of a Velkhorn warrior. The Velkhorn were known as some of the best mercenaries in the galaxy, brutal, efficient, and expensive. "I am Commander Rax," the Velkhorn announced, his voice amplified to fill the chamber. "You are now prisoners of the Wraith Syndicate. Comply, and you will live. Resist, and you will be destroyed. Resist, and you will watch your companions die." The Wraith Syndicate. Jake knew them by reputation. They operated in the lawless sectors, running guns, slaves, and illegal technologies. But they had never attempted anything this bold before. Someone had hired them for this, given them resources and intelligence. "What do you want?" Ambassador Kelrick asked, his voice steady despite the weapons pointed at him. "Silence from you, old one," Rax said. "But since you ask, We want this peace conference to fail. We want the sectors to go back to war. War is profitable, you see. Peace is expensive for people like us." He gestured, and his soldiers began separating certain delegates from the others. They grabbed Princess Valara, several other high-ranking officials, and Ambassador Richards. Jake stayed low, hidden behind the seats. 2 of the human security personnel had been killed in the initial assault. Against 20 or more professional soldiers. Bad odds. Lisa caught his eye. She knew what he was thinking. "Don't," she mouthed. But Jake was already moving, slipping away from the main group while the attackers were focused on their hostages. He moved like smoke, using the chaos and panic as cover. None of the delegates noticed him leaving. Neither did most of the attackers. But one did. A soldier on the perimeter turned and saw Jake's retreat. He raised his rifle. Jake was faster. He crossed the distance in 3 steps, deflected the rifle barrel with one hand, and struck the soldier's throat with the other. The man went down silently, unconscious before he hit the floor. Jake took his rifle, checked the charge, and kept moving. The corridor outside was clear for the moment. He could hear more attackers in other sections, moving hostages or securing positions. He accessed a wall panel and pulled up the station's layout. The hostages were being taken to the command center, probably for better security and communication access. That gave him a destination. But first, he needed to even the odds. Jake moved through the station like he had moved through the Vorkan Citadel 15 years ago. Silent, invisible, deadly. He found an equipment room and gathered supplies. Flashbangs, breaching charges, medical supplies, everything he might need. He set traps in the corridors. Nothing lethal, but enough to slow down reinforcements. He accessed the station's environmental controls and started routing them to manual override. The attackers would not notice until he needed them to. In a maintenance shaft, he found 3 more Wraith soldiers setting up a position. They never saw him coming. He dropped 2 with precise shots, then disabled the 3rd in hand-to-hand combat. None of them had time to raise an alarm. Jake was not angry. Anger made you sloppy. He was something colder than angry. He was focused. He was doing what he had been trained to do, what he had done better than anyone else in the galaxy. He was hunting. More soldiers fell as he moved through the station. He varied his tactics, never using the same approach twice. Sometimes he ambushed them. Sometimes he lured them into traps. Sometimes he simply avoided them entirely, ghosting past their positions to strike at more important targets. He sabotaged their communications relay, forcing them to use short-range radios. He cut power to sections they controlled, forcing them to waste personnel guarding dark corridors. He planted false evidence that made them think there were multiple attackers, spreading their forces thinner. In the command center, Rax was getting reports of missing soldiers, failed check-ins, strange accidents. He pulled up the security feeds, trying to find the source of the problem. Just empty corridors, malfunctioning equipment, shadows that might have been glitches in the system. "Who else is on this station?" Rax demanded of his second-in-command. "Just the delegates and their staff, sir. All accounted for except for some low-level security personnel." "Then where are my soldiers?" No one had an answer. Among the hostages, Princess Valara watched the Wraith commander's growing frustration with grim satisfaction. Whatever was happening, it was making him nervous, and nervous people made mistakes. Ambassador Kelrick sat quietly, his old eyes distant, as if he was remembering something, or perhaps recognizing something. Lisa Grant stood with Ambassador Richards, her hands bound, but her eyes alert. She knew what was happening because she had seen it before. Jake was out there somewhere, doing what he did best. The other delegates were terrified, praying for rescue, hoping the station's distress signal had been received. They did not understand that rescue was already here. It just did not look like they expected. On the station's lower level, Jake reached a junction point in the ventilation system. He could hear Wraith soldiers on the other side of the wall, arguing about the missing troops. He could go around them, avoid confrontation. But he did not need to avoid them anymore. He had thinned their numbers enough. He had set his traps. He had learned their patterns. Now, it was time to finish this. Jake planted a breaching charge on the wall, set the timer for 10 seconds, and moved to a position where he would have clear sightlines when it blew. The explosion would alert every soldier on the station. They would converge on his position. That was exactly what he wanted, because Jake Morrison had not survived the Surge Wars by hiding. He had survived by making his enemies afraid, by becoming the nightmare they whispered about, by being the ghost that ended empires. The charge detonated. The wall exploded inward, and Jake stepped through the smoke like death itself, rifle ready, eyes cold, moving with the terrible grace of someone who had done this 1,000 times before. The Wraith soldiers never stood a chance. The battle for Vale's Edge Station had truly begun, and the attackers were about to learn what it meant to threaten people under the protection of Earth's ghost. The firefight in the lower corridors lasted less than 3 minutes. Jake moved through the Wraith soldiers like a storm, using every advantage the environment gave him. He used the smoke from the breaching charge as cover. He used the narrow corridors to limit their numbers. He used their own tactics against them, the way he had learned to do during the Surge Wars. When the shooting stopped, 6 more Wraith soldiers were unconscious or dead. Jake took their ammunition and kept moving. He could hear more soldiers converging on his position. Good. Every soldier chasing him was one less soldier guarding the hostages. He led them on a chase through the station's maintenance levels, staying just ahead of them, leaving traps and obstacles in his wake. An electromagnetic mine disabled their armor's communication systems. A breaching charge collapsed a corridor behind him, forcing them to find another route. A hacked environmental control filled one section with foam suppressant, blinding them and slowing them down. The Wraith soldiers began to panic. This was not how operations were supposed to go. They were the hunters, they were the professionals, but something was picking them off one by one, and they could not even see what it was. In the command center, Rax slammed his fist against the console. "How many soldiers have you lost?" 14 confirmed, 5 not responding to comms. 19 soldiers. To what? A ghost? Rax's eyes narrowed. Pull everyone back. Tighten the perimeter around the hostages. Whatever is out there, it cannot fight all of us at once. But Jake had no intention of fighting all of them at once. That was not how you won against superior numbers. You divided them. You isolated them. You made them afraid. He reached the command center's external wall and placed a shaped charge at a specific structural point. He had studied the station's blueprints during the summit. He knew which walls were load-bearing and which were just barriers. He knew where the power conduits ran and where the emergency systems connected. The charge detonated, not blowing through the wall but cracking it, creating stress points. Alarms screamed as the station's safety systems detected the structural damage. Emergency bulkheads began closing automatically, sealing sections. Inside the command center, the lights flickered. Rax cursed and ordered his soldiers to override the emergency systems. But Jake had already hacked those systems. Every override command they sent was rerouted, ignored, or delayed. "He is coming for us," Ambassador Kelrick said quietly. Rax turned to glare at the old Varen. "What did you say?" "The ghost of Andros. He is coming for you." "There is no such thing. That is a myth." "Is it?" Kelrick smiled slightly. "Then explain your missing soldiers. Explain the traps. Explain how one person is tearing apart your entire operation." Rax raised his weapon, pointing it at Kelrick's head. "Silence, or you die first." "You should save your ammunition," Kelrick advised. "You are going to need it." Princess Valara stared at the ambassador in confusion. "What are you talking about? Who is the ghost of Andros?" "A human soldier," Kelrick said. During the Surge Wars, he single-handedly destroyed 6 empires, infiltrated their strongest fortresses, killed their best generals, turned their own weapons against them, and when it was over, he disappeared. Most people think he was just propaganda, a story the Allies told to boost morale. But you don't think so, Valara said slowly. I know so, because I have met him. Kelric looked toward the sealed door. And he is here right now, coming to free us. Lisa Grant could not help but smile. She had kept quiet during the whole hostage situation, not drawing attention to herself. But hearing Kelric confirm what she already knew felt satisfying. You are all insane, Rax growled. There is no ghost, no hero. Just one lucky human who will die when my soldiers find him. As if responding to his words, an explosion rocked the command center. The main door buckled inward, emergency lights activated, and through the smoke and sparks, a figure walked into the room. Jake Morrison did not look like a hero. He looked like exactly what he was, a soldier who had been fighting for hours. His uniform was torn, his face had a cut above one eye. His armor, stolen from a fallen Wraith soldier, had scorch marks from near misses. But his eyes were steady, his hands did not shake, and the rifle he carried was pointed directly at Rax. Let them go, Jake said quietly. Rax laughed. It was an ugly sound. Or what? You will shoot me? My soldiers will kill every hostage in this room before you can take a second shot. Your soldiers are gone. All of them. I counted 23 when I started. Now there are only 6 left, and they are all in this room with you. The Wraith soldiers glanced at each other, uncertainty showing in their body language. They had lost contact with their teams. They had heard the explosions, the screams on the comm channels. But all 23? That was impossible. You are bluffing, Rax said, but his voice was less certain now. Test it if you want. Send someone to check. Jake stepped further into the room, moving with the careful precision of someone who knew exactly what he was doing. But we both know you won't, because you are starting to realize something went very wrong with your plan. Rax studied him, trying to understand. Who are you? Nobody important, just a captain in Earth's security force. No. Rax shook his head slowly. Nobody does what you have done. Not alone, not against professionals. His eyes widened suddenly, recognition dawning. The way you move, the tactics, I have seen this before, in classified combat footage from the Surge Wars. He turned to his soldiers. Kill him. Kill him now. The soldiers raised their weapons, but Jake was already moving. He threw a flashbang that he had been holding in his left hand. The explosion of light and sound filled the room. In the chaos, Jake crossed the distance to the nearest soldier, disarmed him, and used the man's own weapon against the others. The fight was brutal and fast. Jake fought with the efficiency of someone who had no time to waste and no room for error. He disabled 2 soldiers with shots to their armor's weak points. He dodged return fire with movements that seemed to predict where the shots would be before they were fired. The hostages threw themselves to the floor, trying to stay out of the line of fire. Lisa used the confusion to break free from her bonds and pull Ambassador Richards to cover. Rax fired at Jake, but missed. Jake did not miss. His shot hit Rax's weapon, sending it spinning across the floor. The Wraith commander went for a backup pistol, but Jake was already on him, moving inside his guard, striking pressure points that dropped Rax to his knees. The last 2 soldiers tried to flee. They did not make it. Jake shot out their leg armor, dropping them to the ground, then disabled them with follow-up shots. Silence fell over the command center. Smoke drifted through the air. Sparks fell from damaged equipment. And Jake Morrison stood in the center of it all, breathing hard, but still standing. Rax lay on the floor, paralyzed from the nerve strikes Jake had delivered. He stared up at the human soldier with something like awe and terror mixed together. "I know who you are now," Rax whispered. "The ghost of Andros, the Realm Breaker. They said you were dead. They said you were a myth." "I was retired," Jake said. "You brought me back." He moved to the hostages, checking each one for injuries. Princess Valara stared at him with wide eyes, all her earlier arrogance gone. "You," she breathed, "you are him, the soldier from the Surge Wars." Jake did not answer. He was helping Ambassador Richards to his feet, making sure the older man was unhurt. Lisa approached with a medkit, tending to Jake's injuries. "Show off," she muttered, but there was pride in her voice. "Had to make sure the message was clear," Jake replied. The command center door opened again, and Ambassador Kelrick entered with a squad of station security forces who had finally managed to fight their way through. They stopped short when they saw the scene. The disabled Wraith soldiers, the freed hostages, and Jake Morrison standing calmly in the middle of it all. "Captain Morrison has resolved the situation," Kelrick announced unnecessarily. Then he turned to the other ambassadors. "Let me properly introduce you. This is Jake Morrison, formerly known as the Ghost of Andros, the man who ended the Surge Wars, the man who broke 6 empires and saved countless billions of lives." The delegates stared, some in disbelief, some in shock. Princess Valara looked like she wanted the floor to swallow her. "The operations were classified," one of the ambassadors said weakly. "They were," Kelrick agreed, "for his own protection and at his own request. But I think recent events have made classification irrelevant." Rax laughed bitterly from the floor. "We never stood a chance, did we? The Wraith Syndicate defeated by 1 retired soldier. They will never let me live this down." "You won't have time to worry about it," Lisa said. "You are going to prison for a very long time." As the station's security took the Wraith soldiers into custody, Jake walked to the viewport. He looked tired, older than his years, carrying weight that no one else could see. Princess Valara approached slowly, hesitantly. "Captain Morrison, I owe you an apology." He turned to face her. "I insulted you," she continued. "I called you primitive, unremarkable. I was wrong." "You weren't wrong about humanity being young," Jake said. "We are." The medical teams worked through the night, treating injuries and checking the delegates for shock. The damage to the station was substantial, but repairable. 3 delegates had died in the initial attack, along with 17 station security personnel. The news spread across the galaxy quickly, along with another piece of news that spread even faster. The ghost of Andros was real, and he was human. Jake spent hours being debriefed by the station's security chief, going over everything that had happened. He answered questions mechanically, providing tactical details while avoiding anything too classified. Some secrets still needed to stay secret. When they finally let him go, dawn was breaking over the station's observation windows, or what passed for dawn, in the middle of space. Jake found himself in the diplomatic gardens, a large room with plants from dozens of worlds and viewing ports that showed the stars. Ambassador Kelrick sat on a bench beneath a tree that grew blue leaves. "Mind if I join you?" Jake asked. "Please." Kelrick gestured to the space beside him. "I was hoping we might talk." Jake sat, grateful for the chance to rest. His body ached from the fight. He had forgotten how much combat took out of you, how much it cost to push yourself that hard. "You knew who I was from the beginning," Jake said. "I suspected. I have lived long enough to recognize certain patterns, the way you stood, the way you watched, the way you said nothing when insulted." Kelrick smiled. "Princess Valara thought your silence meant weakness. I thought it meant control. I am good at keeping quiet. A useful skill for someone who has done what you have done." Kelrick paused. "Why did you want your achievements hidden? Most soldiers would want recognition for saving billions of lives." Jake was quiet for a moment, watching the stars through the viewport. "Because recognition brings attention. Attention brings responsibility. People start looking at you like you have answers to everything. Like you are special. You are special. No, I am just someone who is in the right place at the right time, with the right skills and a lot of luck. Jake turned to face Kelric. The Surge Wars were not won by one person. They were won by millions of soldiers, pilots, engineers, medics, all doing their jobs. I just did mine in a way that got noticed. That is remarkably humble for someone who infiltrated the Vorkon Citadel. Humble has nothing to do with it. It is survival. If people know what you can do, they start expecting you to do it again. They start making you responsible for problems you cannot solve. They start treating you like a weapon instead of a person. Kelric nodded slowly. I understand. But you cannot hide anymore. Too many people know now. I know, Jake sighed. The Surge Wars were 15 years ago. The people who remember them are getting older. The younger generation has no idea what it cost to stop the Surge. Maybe they need a reminder that peace is not free. Will you tell your story? No, but I will not hide from it anymore either. They sat in silence for a while, two soldiers from different species, different times, but sharing the same understanding of what war really meant. Later that morning, the summit reconvened. The delegates were shaken, but determined. The attack had shown them all how fragile peace really was, how many forces were working to undermine it. Princess Valara requested permission to address the assembly. She stood at the central podium, her silver robes repaired, her crown back in place, but something had changed in her bearing. She looked humbled. Yesterday I made a grave mistake, she began, her voice clear and strong. I insulted the human delegation. I called them primitive. I dismissed their contributions to galactic civilization. I was speaking from arrogance and ignorance. The chamber was completely silent. I have learned that age does not equal wisdom, and youth does not equal weakness. The human species may be new to the stars, but they have already proven themselves as valuable allies and formidable defenders of peace. She turned to look directly at Jake, who stood with the human delegation. Captain Jake Morrison saved my life yesterday. He saved all our lives, and in doing so, he revealed himself as the legendary Ghost of Andros, the soldier who ended the Surge Wars, while my people were safe in our empire, profiting from the chaos. Humans like Captain Morrison were fighting and dying to protect worlds they had never even visited. Valara bowed, a deep bow that showed true respect. I propose that Earth be granted full status as a core member of the Galactic Council, with all rights and privileges that such status entails. They have more than earned it. The vote was unanimous. The Catherine Empire also offered a formal alliance with Earth, along with technology exchanges and trade agreements. Other species followed, offering similar deals. In one day, humanity's position in galactic politics changed completely. Ambassador Richards was overwhelmed. He kept looking at Jake, as if he could not quite believe this was happening. Lisa just grinned and whispered, "Guess you will have to come out of retirement permanently now." I was never retired, Jake said. Just quiet. The summit continued for 3 more days. The peace treaty that emerged was stronger than anyone had hoped. The attack by the Wraith Syndicate had unified the delegates, reminded them why they were there. On the final day, there was a ceremony honoring those who had fallen during the attack. Jake stood with the other survivors, listening to the names being read. Each name was a person, someone with a family, with dreams, with a life that had been cut short. After the ceremony, Princess Valara approached him one last time. She carried a small box, ornately carved from crystal. "This is a Catherine Honor Medallion," she said, offering it to him. "It is given only to those who have performed great service to our empire. You saved my life. You represent everything I failed to see about humanity. Please accept it." Jake hesitated, then took the box. Inside was a medal that caught the light like a rainbow, beautiful and simple at the same time. "Thank you, Princess. We are allies now." "Thank you, Valara." She smiled, a real smile this time, not the practiced expression of royalty. "Can I ask you something, Jake? When I insulted you, when I called you unremarkable, you said nothing. Why? Because words from someone who does not know me do not define who I am. I know what I have done, what I am capable of. Need to prove it to anyone unless the situation requires it. And the situation required it yesterday. Yes, people were in danger. That is when you stop being quiet and start being useful." Valara looked at him with something like admiration. "Your people are lucky to have you. I am lucky to have them. A soldier is only as strong as the people he fights for." The summit ended with agreements signed, alliances formed, and new friendships forged. Earth had arrived on the galactic stage, not through conquest or aggression, but through the quiet strength of one soldier who had done what needed to be done. Jake and Lisa prepared to return to Earth. As they walked toward their transport ship, Ambassador Richards caught up with them. "Captain Morrison, I have been authorized to offer you a promotion. Admiral, if you want it. Command of Earth's entire security force." Jake shook his head. "Thank you, sir, but no. I am a soldier, not an admiral. I belong in the field, not behind a desk." "I thought you would say that." Richards smiled. "Then how about this? Special Operations Coordinator. You report only to me. You build your own team. You handle threats that require your particular skills." "That sounds better." "Good, because the galaxy just got a lot more interesting, and I have a feeling we are going to need the ghost of Andros again. But if you do, I will be ready." As their ship left the station, Jake stood at the viewport, watching Vale's edge grow smaller. Lisa stood beside him. "You okay?" she asked. "Just thinking." "About what?" "About how fast things can change. A week ago, I was just another security captain. Now the whole galaxy knows who I am." "Having regrets?" "No, just adjusting." He smiled slightly. "Besides, maybe it is time. The Surge Wars ended 15 years ago. The veterans are getting older. The younger generation needs to understand what was sacrificed for their peace. So you will teach them. I will remind them. There is a difference." The ship jumped to faster than light speed, and the stars became streaks of light. Jake closed his eyes, feeling the familiar sensation of acceleration, the pull of gravity, the hum of the engines. He thought about Princess Valara, about how her opinion had changed in just a few days. He thought about all the other species who had dismissed humanity as young and inexperienced. They were learning that age did not matter as much as character, that being new did not mean being weak. Humanity had a place in the galaxy now, not because they had demanded it or fought for recognition, but because when the moment came, they had proven themselves, one quiet soldier at a time. The ghost of Andros had done his job. He had broken realms when realms needed breaking. He had saved lives when lives needed saving. And he had done it all without asking for glory or recognition. But now the galaxy knew, and that changed everything. Jake Morrison opened his eyes and looked at the stars rushing past. Somewhere out there, new threats were forming, new conflicts were brewing. Peace was always temporary, always fragile, always needing someone to defend it. Because that was what the ghost of Andros did. He protected the quiet moments between wars. He stood watch while others slept. He carried the weight so others did not have to. And if the time came when realms needed breaking again, he would break them. But he hoped that time would never come. He hoped the lessons learned at Vale's Edge would last. He hoped Princess Valara and the others would remember that strength came in many forms, that young species could teach old empires new truths, and that sometimes the most remarkable people were the ones who looked the most ordinary. As the ship carried him home to Earth, Jake allowed himself a rare moment of satisfaction. The mission was complete. The hostages were safe. The peace treaty was signed, and humanity had finally earned its place among the stars. Not through conquest, not through arrogance, but through the quiet courage of doing what was right when no one was watching. That was his way, and the galaxy was learning to respect it.